Okay. Testing, testing. Two, one, two. We're live. Very exciting. Very exciting. All right. Welcome back. I know this is a little impromptu, but hello. Hello. I hope all is well. Welcome on. Usually I end up announcing these ahead of time, but had some schedule changes in the last few days. Um, so now's the time I can come on live. So I hope this works well. Obviously, this is going to be recorded. So if you want to find it, you can find it on Instagram. You can find it on YouTube. Today, we're going to be talking about what we talk about GErd, reflux, very common. So we're going to get into that really quick. If you're not opposed to it, you want to get started on your health journey, set up a free 15-minute call with me. I'm more than happy to um, get the ball rolling with you. So if that's something you're not opposed to doing, the link is in my bio somewhere. Suffering is optional. It does not have to be anything that you have to deal with. And I hope that some of this information here can help with that. Because that's ultimately what this is about, is you realizing that you're your own best healer. And I'm just here to kind of show you a little bit of what I've learned, but more importantly, so that you can do it yourself. Because that's ultimately what this is all about. So with that in mind, let's talk about reflux. So it's estimated somewhere that you're roughly between 15 and 30% of all Americans experience GErd or reflux. You might hear it as heartburn, acid reflux. They're all kind of names for it. It is extremely common though. So it might affect up to as many as 50% of Americans, which is a lot. You're talking one in two people experience reflux. That's quite a bit. Now, there are a lot of reasons as to why. We're going to talk a little bit about the conventional treatment of it and why it's a little bit wacky. And we're going to talk about actual solutions. So, what I tend to find is what's happening with heartburn is you're getting it occurs when there's irritating acid forming foods, which create an over acidic or under acidic environment in the stomach. Usually, this is going to be true due to poor nutrition. It could be due to stress. It could be due to relying on antacids for long periods of time. So, if you're consuming too many acid forming foods, this can actually lead to heartburn. This is especially true, I find, if you're consuming a lot of red meat or animal products, where it's going to put a lot of taxing on the stomach because that's primarily where protein digestion is going to take place. It doesn't necessarily happen much in the mouth. It mostly happens in the stomach. That's where it's really initiated. But there are other reasons outside the stomach where this might happen too. So it could be due to poor pancreatic enzyme function or not producing enough. So we know the pancreas, it has two main functions. The more important one, or the more, is actually not necessarily insulin. That's the one I think it's more known for. But what the pancreas really is responsible for is secreting digestive enzymes to help finish the breakdown of food after it leaves the stomach. And it also helps kind of neutralize that very acidic pH when it's coming from the stomach going into the intestines. So, and bile kind of helps with that too. But the pancreas's really primary job is digestive enzymes, helping with the digestive process. So if that's not functioning properly, that could put a strain on the stomach, and then ultimately you might be experiencing symptoms of reflux. Bile flow, since we just mentioned that, and liver dysfunction can also be a reason why reflux can be occurring. So, really, bile and pancreatic enzymes together are responsible for neutralizing the acidic chyme from the stomach, and then they help um, alkalize what's left over. So, to help, because if the reason why there's so much turnover in the stomach, those cells turn over every 3 to 5 days, is because that's such an acidic environment. It's a very harsh environment. So neutralizing that makes everything else more tolerable to the rest of the digestive tract. But if neither of these are functioning properly, that's going to impair digestion. That also means that you could potentially be left with reflux or something of the sort. Um, it could lead. It could also be due to um, what's called, you're going to have issues with the sphincter muscle, the lower esophageal sphincter, not closing properly, not being able to close as efficiently as it should. This could again be due to issues with pH. It could be due to weak muscles, the muscles itself not being strong enough to, and then can be leading to some of those symptoms you're experiencing with reflux. Now, there's a few other things that could be going on, but we have to talk about the stomach itself a little bit. Now, the stomach has a few types of cells that are really important and play a role when it comes to reflux. So you have chief cells, which are responsible for creating pepsin, which is what breaks down protein. You have parietal cells, which are responsible for creating the hydrochloric acid, which creates that acidic environment in the stomach, and also intrinsic factor, which we know is needed to help properly metabolize B12. And then we have goblet cells, which are responsible for creating the mucus lining that lines the stomach. So we have chief cells, we have parietal cells, and we have goblet cells. If the chief cells, for whatever reason, are not functioning properly, you're not going to create the pepsin you need. You're not going to get the breakdown of protein you might need, and that could potentially lead to reflux. If it's the parietal cells and you're not producing the stomach acid you need, that sphincter muscle might not close, and then you get reflux. You see what's going on here. So here's just some of the mechanisms as to how the stomach works. Now, there could be a mechanical reason too, and this is actually fairly common, and a lot of chiropractors, believe it or not, are familiar with it. And it's called a hiatal hernia or pseudohiatal hernia. And in this, what happens is you have this diaphragm, right? A diaphragm muscle almost looks like an umbrella. Well, towards the back of the umbrella, there's kind of there's a hiatus, and there's a hole. And in this hole is going to be where you're going to have blood vessels, nerves, but also the esophagus is going to go through so that it connects the mouth and esophagus to the stomach. So they all go through this hole. And if part of the stomach sometimes can creep through that hiatus, you get what's known as a hiatal hernia. It's part of the stomach is herniating through through the diaphragm almost into the chest. Um, and it leaves you with some symptoms that could be pretty vague. So it might feel like a dull chest pain. You might feel short of breath. You might have heart palpitations. It could feel like you have almost like a ball, like a ball of food almost stuck sometimes inside of you, or it could be heartburn. Now, unfortunately, with hiatal hernias, this is actually very easily fixed. So there's a method, there's a procedure that chiropractors can do. That's you don't need to really do anything. In fact, you could learn how to do it at home. What you would do is you would find the middle of your breastbone, and just below that, there's a little bony piece called the xiphoid process. You don't want to touch that. You want to go below that and a little bit to the left. That's essentially where that's going to be. What you're going to want to do is try to take a full exhale, get your hands kind of underneath that and almost behind and above. So almost pushing like behind the rib cage. It's much easier to do, say, lying down with your legs bent, so that it kind of relaxes the abdomen a little bit, and you could kind of push down as you're breathing. Sometimes you might actually get an audible release, but many times this helps with those hiatal hernias, and it's pretty immediate if that's the case. But but yeah, so if you can almost literally pull part of that back down, and sometimes you will get relief almost immediately. It's actually pretty wild how well that works when that's the case. Now there's four types of hiatal hernias. One is the most common. So we have type 1, type 2, type 3, and type 4. Type 1 is the most common, like 95% of them would be considered type 1. So you're going to have this sliding one, which is kind of what I was explaining. You have this hole, and then the tube is the diaphragm that kind of runs through, and then part of the stomach kind of peeks through that hole up. And when that gets caught up, that can be known as a sliding hiatal hernia. And that's where that maneuver I kind of just explained would be very useful. Basically, a portion of the stomach herniates up into the chest cavity, and you could literally slide it back down. Then we have type 2, which is a localized defect in the phrenoesophageal membrane. We have type 3, which is a combination of 1 and 2. And then we have type 4, which is a large defect in that membrane, and sometimes even larger or larger portions of the stomach, but also the colon or the spleen or parts of the pancreas or small intestine can actually jump through this. So there's quite a bit that can go on. And again, with this hernia, or with a hiatal hernia, I should say, there's a lot of potential symptoms you can get, and a lot of them mimic reflux. So reflux can actually be a symptom of a hiatal hernia, but also you could have things like bloating, like flatulence, indigestion, constipation, diarrhea, hair loss, and that's due to nutrient absorption, allergies, autoimmune issues, acne, iron deficiency, chronic fatigue. All of these can mimic what you would get with reflux. Now, again, in reflux itself, we're having an issue where that lower esophageal sphincter is not necessarily closing. And that's ultimately the issue. Um, and as a consequence, we're going to have undigested food, we're going to have stomach acid, regurgitated reflux back into the esophagus. And this is ultimately going to cause heartburn. You can also get other symptoms, maybe like bad breath. You might get receding gums, irritation, and there are some other symptoms that can come along with it. But if this goes on for too long, it can really irritate that lining. You could end up with something known as Barrett's esophagus or even esophageal cancer if you're constantly exposing that esophagus to acid. So, or to stomach acid, I should say. Now, ironically, when you're talking about conventional medications and a lot of these over the counter drugs, what they do for reflux is they tend to provide temporary relief. But what happens is they tend to cause new or more heightened symptoms in the long run. If you've taken things like Tums before, you might notice these yourself. Now, generally speaking, there are three types of medications that are given for reflux. You have your proton pump inhibitors or PPIs. You have H2 blockers, and you have antacids. So they all end up with a similar result. They have slightly different mechanisms. So antacids, like Tums, are usually the first choice in the conventional space. The goal of them is to reduce the amount of stomach acid you produce quickly. Usually it's within minutes. But again, you're not getting to the reason as to why is there so much acid in the first place. H2 blockers don't necessarily act as fast, but they tend to last longer. Now, your H2 blockers, they go by more common names of like Pepsid or Pepsid AC or Zantac. Those would be your common H2 blockers. And they basically block a substance in the body that encourages acid production in the stomach. So basically, it stops the mechanism for producing stomach acid. Then we have our proton pump inhibitors or PPIs. This would be your Nexium. This would be your Prevacid. This would be Prilosec. Um, these essentially block an enzyme that tells your stomach to produce acid. And then there's a hydrogen potassium ATP pump in the cells that line the stomach wall. It essentially shuts that down. Now, it'll shut it down for essentially the life of that cell. So it could be anywhere from 3 to 5 days, since stomach cells usually only last roughly 3 to 5 days at a time. Now, interestingly enough, we already know proton pump inhibitors, using them commonly, lead to hypergastrinemia, which is associated with gastric cancers. So, in other words, if you're taking proton pump inhibitors, you have a higher rate of stomach cancer. Go figure. Now, under normal circumstances, your stomach pH should be very low, meaning it's a very acidic environment. Now, it's important to note that on a pH scale, a potential for hydrogen scale, it's a logarithmic scale. So we say 7 is neutral. So if we go to 6, it's not twice as acidic as 7, it's 10 times. If you're going to 5 from 7, that's 100 times more acidic. So it's a logarithmic scale. It's important to keep that in mind. So every jump in a point is a logarithmic increase. So important to kind of keep that in mind because there's a big difference. It seems small when you're talking about like one number or point 0.5, but these are actually big changes in acidic levels within a short range here. But anyway, your acidic, the stomach acid itself, the stomach environment is the only acidic environment in the digestive tract, and it's going to be between. You want to keep that pH definitely below 3. Usually, it should be between 1.5 and 2.5. Now, what these drugs do, you have your H2 blockers, you have your PPIs, you have your antacids. They're going to raise that pH. And the esophageal sphincter is actually pH sensitive. So if it's say you're taking these and your pH is going to be above say 3, your lower esophageal sphincter is actually going to stay open. So it's not going to close the way it properly should. A more acidic environment is actually going to close that esophageal sphincter. It is actually pH sensitive. It's sensitive to how acidic the stomach is. And this is one of the biggest issues with these medications is it's a band-aid. It's not actually going to fix the problem. And every time you take some of these medications, the stomach is going to have to work harder to bring that acid level back to where it should be into that pH range between 1.5 and 2.5. Long term, this is going to lead to a downward spiral of issues with absorption. So, absorbing nutrients is going to be an issue. Vitamin deficiencies are going to be an issue. Anemias are going to be an issue. Things like SIBO. One of the reasons why the stomach is so acidic is that it actually kills off certain microbes that shouldn't be able to make it further in the digestive tract. But if it's not acidic enough, you might have certain bacteria or fungi or mold or yeast or parasites that survive that digestion process, make it into, say, the small intestine or large intestine, and actually cause leaky gut. So, or things like SIBO, or anything that could come from that. So, any autoimmune type issue has an underlying gut component to it. Uh, all of them, and it could show up as a skin issue, and say, like eczema or psoriasis. It can show up in any way possible. Diabetes can be an issue because it's going to again affect digestion and pancreas function. We talked about that before. Chronic fatigue. Why? Because if you can't absorb the nutrients you need, it's going to be a big issue. You're not going to be able to get the energy you need from the electrolytes you need. You're not going to get the energy you need from the vitamins and minerals that either the bacteria provide or the food's going to provide because we literally aren't breaking it down the way we should. Now, along with that, if you're using PPIs and H2 blockers or antibiotics, which can also do this, we didn't even touch on that. You know, this is going to lead to things like H. pylori infections. It's going to lead to poor absorption of nutrients. It's going to affect your stress response. Eating too quickly can cause GErd. Being stressed all the time can cause GErd. Using pain medications like NSAIDs are going to affect your ability to produce enough stomach acid. So all of these things are going to cause it. Now, these medications, along with causing GErd, can can cause reflux and microbiome changes. So things like blood pressure medications, medications for chest pain or angina, medications for asthma and breathing problems, sedatives, anxiety medications, antibiotics, antidepressants, nitroglycerin, osteoporosis medications, pain relievers. All of these are going to play a role in either making that reflux worse or affecting your stomach's ability to create the stomach acid it needs. And if it can't do that, you're going to have some real issues. So, when you're and this now we're running into issues, particularly when it comes to antibiotics, because we're seeing, say, in hospitals that we're getting antibiotic resistant bacteria. The drugs they're using in the hospital can't work, and ultimately that person is going to end up passing because there's always going to be some microbes that survive, and those that survive are able to pass on whatever they can to that resisted, you know, intervention X, and you'll be able to pass that on to newer generations. So, and that stuff happens all the time. Remember, bacteria, microbes reproduce at a rate much, much faster than we do. So they're able to see these changes in a much shorter amount of time. And when stomach acid levels are low, again, we're not going to be able to break down the protein we need. This takes a toll on the small intestine, the pancreas, the liver. Now is trying to overproduce more of these enzymes to pick up the slack that the stomach is not picking up. And again, it can lead to some real uh, big issues kind of down the road. So, and this is where you're going to get again malabsorption and maldigestion. And just quickly to kind of, I keep bringing them up, so I want to explain it. Malabsorption is the ability, or an inability, I should say, to absorb what we need and could potentially lead to nutrient deficiency. Maldigestion is the inability to break it down. So, for example, if pancreatic enzymes are not released in sufficient amounts, we could have issues with fat and protein malabsorption and maldigestion. So it could lead to some real issues here. Um, Also, if you're not breaking this down all the way, leaky gut can again become an issue here because now you're going to have undigested proteins. What actually gets through when we're consuming carbohydrates, fats, proteins, we can only consume the simplest forms possible. So that's simple sugars like glucose and fructose, that's amino acids, and that's fatty acids. So if we're not getting those, if we're not just absorbing those Lego pieces, they're the individual Lego pieces. If bigger pieces get through, that's going to trigger an immune reaction, and this is what we call an autoimmune response. So that would be kind of like a good way to do it. Now, stress, when we're talking about solutions now, stress is a big one. Now, I will say with reflux, if you are suffering with reflux, the first thing we have to do is understand our stress levels first. Why? Because we have a parasympathetic and we have a sympathetic nervous system. With that in mind, we have our parasympathetic, which is rest and digest, and we have our sympathetic, which is fight or flight. If we're constantly in a fight or flight stress state, if we're angry at whoever we're eating with, if we're watching something that's pretty disturbing, if we're watching, your traditional news while you're eating dinner, this is going to put you in a stress state. And if you're in a stress state, that blood is going to be shifted away from the digestive tract to the muscles, to the periphery, because because the body is smart and actually thinks it's in a dangerous situation. And ultimately, we need to survive to tomorrow before we worry about what we're eating right now. But when we're in a stress state, you're talking about now 4 times more blood is in the periphery versus digestion. So we're not going to be able to cycle through and make the things that we need in order to do that, in order to break down, say, the protein we need in the stomach. It's going to affect our ability to digest food. It's going to affect our ability to create the stomach acid we need. And it's going to be a big issue. Now, why is this important? Because A, it's going to affect digestion. B, we have this nerve called the phrenic nerve, and it originates in the neck, C3, 4, and 5. That's where it comes from. This is responsible for innervating the lungs, but also the diaphragm itself. So, how we breathe, if we're constantly mouth breathing, if we're constantly in what appears to be a stress state, that's going to again shift blood away. We're going to have issues with digestion. So nasal breathing is going to trigger that relaxation. It's going to shunt blood back to the digestive tract and increase our ability to digest food. So, two things I recommend first off that everyone try if there is reflux is one, get into a space where you can be present with your food and literally just nasally breathe and just take a few breaths before you eat. The second one is we don't want to be drinking a lot of liquids when we're eating. Um, Reason being, again, that pH level has to be pretty low. So if it's not low enough, if that acidic environment is not as acidic as it should be, if we're diluting it with even say things like water, that's going to affect our ability to break the stuff down we need at the moment. So that could be an issue. So, and ideally, when it comes to hydration, I've talked about this before. We can eat a lot of our hydration. So the best source of things like structured water, of electrolytes is actually going to be raw fruits and vegetables, which is where you're going to get a lot of the hydration you need on a regular basis. So that's going to help on that front. But if there is stress, if you notice you're in a stress state when you're eating, or you're eating in your car, or you're worrying about what you have to do in the next 30 minutes, then we have to work backwards and plan on, okay, how can I get into a place where I can actually enjoy the food I'm eating and I'm not driving in the car trying to stuff something in my face while I'm doing my makeup on while I'm going 60 miles an hour on the highway. That is a great way to end up with reflux if you're doing that. It's fantastic. So it is impossible to get into a state where you are actually relaxed enough to enjoy, consume, and break down your food properly if that is the case. So that's really important when it comes to this. Now, minerals. I mentioned minerals earlier. Our best sources of things like structured water, again, are fruits and vegetables, but also electrolytes. So you have your magnesium, you have calcium, you have sodium, you have potassium, raw fruits and vegetables. Low magnesium, you might not know, many different drugs, particularly ones that are used for reflux, are going to deplete magnesium. What are some symptoms of low magnesium? Muscle spasm, irregular heartbeat, cognitive decline, potentially. You're going to have issues with maybe brain fog, convulsions. So, type 2 diabetes, you could have an increased risk of fractures, or osteoporosis, particularly more so with the drugs. That's a story for another day. If the body is constantly in an acidic state outside of the stomach, because the stomach is supposed to be an acidic environment, but outside of that, you're going to have some real issues. So, that is kind of like a place to start. The other things are going to be, what are the other things that are going to alter the microbiome that could affect how well the stomach is creating uh, what you need in it. And these are going to again be things like antibiotics. That's a huge one. You're going to do the environmental toxins. So glyphosate, we're going to get into in a second. Different types of herbicides and pesticides, heavy metals, whether they're from injections, whether they're from different types of medications, whether they're from the environment. So again, cadmium, lead, arsenic, mercury, dental fillings are a big one. Those are usually the big four when it comes to this. If you have other issues with the bowels, that's going to affect the stomach too. So inflammatory bowel disease, then we have to address that as well. Now, glyphosate's a big one because glyphosate actually damages the gut. Um, we already know this. It pokes holes in the gut. It will bore holes in it. It acts as an antibiotic. It was actually patented as an antibiotic. Now, if you break down the word anti against, bios life, so literally against life, the reason it was allowed in the first place is kind of a technicality. So the way the proponents of glyphosate kind of lobbied for it is that glyphosate didn't damage mammalian cells in a certain quantity. But the problem is it actually, because Mammalian cells don't have a pathway known as the shikimate pathway. Problem is, all the bacteria do. And we're 10 times more bacteria than human. We have 10 times more bacterial cells than human cells. We have 10 times more viral cells than bacterial cells. So just think about that. So it's affecting most of our cells. And the problem is we're actually finding now glyphosate in amounts 80 to like 400 times the amount that was stated that might harm mammalian cells. We're going 80 to hundreds of times above that in America. So it is causing damage. It's poking holes in the digestive tract and it's leading to some real issues. So, we have to start, have to start by not ignoring the symptoms, understanding that we're suppressing them is only going to lead to bigger issues down the road. So we have to make sure here are the things. So if we're looking for things to do, this is how, we got to, end this and kind of go forward here. So, you know, we have to make sure we have healthy nerve supply, that we have balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. If you are taking medications, find out why you are taking medications and fix the underlying problem. I like using different types of, we have to get rid of the herbicides and pesticides. So if you can go organic as close to 100% as you can. I understand it's more expensive. I promise it will save you money in the long term when you're talking about medical bills down the road. And when you consider the fact that if you survive a heart attack, it's going to cost you on the ballpark of $1 million over your lifetime, I promise you the grocery bill looks pretty small. And if you want to save money on organic produce, you know, look at CSAs, look at places like Aldi's, look at places like Costco, where you can even find some fresh or frozen different types of organic produce. If there are farmers near you, talk to them. Figure out how they're producing their food because this stuff makes an absolute difference. We have to make sure that we are getting these pesticides like glyphosate out. Now, I like using different herbal formulas to help with that. So I like using different types of superfoods to help alkalize the body. In the programs I use different formulas to help uh, detox glyphosate out of the body, get it out. So not only are we not adding more in, we're taking this stuff out. So we have to get this stuff out. If there is a microbial imbalance, then we'll take care of that. We have different antimicrobial formulas to help deal with that, to help find balance. If there's a candida overgrowth, if there is SIBO, if there are things like that, we need to start taking that out, but we have to start getting the foundational stuff we need. And that's why I am a big fan of using different superfoods. I'm a big fan of using herbals because they help find balance in a natural way that is already naturally occurring. So that is big. Making sure that we're consuming more alkaline foods, more fruits and vegetables. Those are the most highly alkalizing. They're the most highly electrolyte based, or have a foundation of electrolytes we need to create that environment so that we aren't in a spot where we're going to be a real issue, have a real issue. So, primarily fruits and vegetables is going to be a big place to go. I like adding superfoods, especially now because we're now living in a world where 1% of our soils are considered nutrient dense because of using so much of this glyphosate and different herbicides and pesticides, that our foods are not as nutrient rich as they were before. So that's a big one. If that's something you're interested in, getting started with, you can just message me and I'm more than happy to help point you in the right direction. So getting rid of that goes a really long way. You want to get rid of the irritants. So the most common irritants are going to be things like alcohol, your artificial sweeteners, your fried foods, caffeine, coffee is a big one. Vegetable oils, canola oil, processed foods, all of these are going to be going to make this stuff worse. Different herbs are going to be really helpful to help calm this down. So things like licorice are really good. DGL. You can use chamomile, fennel, ginger. All of these are fantastic to help calm this down in the moment. But again, you have to get this stuff out first, or if you want it to go away. You can try, during meals, doing a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar and a small amount of water to help start stimulate the digestive tract. You want to, if you can, again, limit water consumption 20 to 30 minutes before, during, and after meals. That's a really big one. Aloe vera juice is a huge one too. Aloe vera juice, can help soothe some of that gut lining. Things like marshmallow root, slippery elm, really helpful for starting to help heal that. Ginger root, like I said, you can make a ginger tea very quickly. You just put a couple slices in some hot water, let that steep. That'll go a long way. You can add lemon to that, or really any citrus, orange. All of that is going to be really helpful, very alkalizing, very soothing. Slippery elm, like I said, great for the mouth, throat, stomach, intestines, the lining of that. It helps soothe that. So those are all great, great, great options as far as healing it. But you have to take care of the foundations. Um, you know, Start alkalizing the body, get it in a spot where you're getting more of these alkaline rich fruits and vegetables, get your electrolyte levels up, get rid of the processed stuff that's causing it. Again, heavy in the meats, the dairy, the alcohol, the coffee, the artificial sweeteners, the fried foods. All of these are going to make your reflux worse. And if we're constantly throwing that stuff in the system, it's not going to go away. Even if you use all these herbals, you have to change what you're eating on a daily basis. Um, and that's ultimately the beginning of it. I like using nutrient dense superfoods. That's why I use it in my clinic, and getting folks started on that while we're making these changes. I like getting people started for at least 30 days. If you want the best results, push it to 60 or 90. And that's when you're going to start seeing some real changes. Often, if this has been going on for a long time, especially years, you have to realize, for every year or so something's been going on, you got to give yourself 4 to 6 weeks of healing time. So, even something like a 10% improvement is going to be a real, is going to be a huge bump, month to month. So that's what I got for today. I know that's a lot on reflux, but it's so common. And it's, if we keep ignoring it and just start throwing band-aids at the problem, it's not going to go away. And it only gets trickier to treat the longer you push it down the road. So if someone someone you love, or maybe yourself struggles with this, get started with it today. Start fixing it, because it is fixable. And, before you have to deal with complications down the road. Remember, ultimately, you have to remember, suffering's optional. You have the power to heal yourself. This is absolutely something that you can do it with. It just takes some time, but with some persistence, you can make some huge, huge improvements. So I hope you have a lovely weekend. I will see you guys next week. Have a good one. Bye.